Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting an exciting new series. What if Deku went back in time? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Fernando Leo on archiveofourown.org. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now, let's dive into the story. Going back in time to reclaim your past body is probably as pleasant as it sounds, which is to say, it isn't pleasant at all. Izuku thinks it must feel remarkably similar to being hit full force by a tsunami. He's left dizzy and out of breath, his ears roaring and his blood thrumming. The world spinning head over heels as Izuku tries his best to not throw up and to remember how to breathe. He comes back to himself on the floor, body trembling with aftershocks, panting between clenched teeth as his stomach rolls. Izuku's ears are buzzing, his fingers and toes are numb. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know when he is. "What's wrong with Deku?" a young voice asks, high-pitched and mocking. "Maybe his primitive physiology is finally killing him," someone else says. "There's a reason most quirkless people have died off by now, you know?" Something harshly jabs at Izuku's back. He realizes, somewhat distantly, that it's the toes of a person's shoe. "Don't touch him," the first voice hisses. "What?" Someone laughs. "You still think that uselessness is contagious?" "No," the girl says. "It's a bad omen to touch a quirkless person. Don't you know? My mom told me." "Whatever," a boy scoffs before another shoe kicks at Izuku's curled form. "Doesn't matter. Let's go before we're late to class." Izuku keeps his eyes squeezed shut, listening as their footsteps fade away. He lays there and relearns how to breathe, and when he thinks he can open his eyes without throwing up, he does. He's greeted by off-white walls and yellow-stained tiled floors. "Aldera," Izuku says as the bell rings overhead, making his vision waver and his head P&D. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting his forehead thunk to the floor. Good. That's good. If Izuku is at his junior high, that means he must have gone far enough back. Now to just figure out exactly how far that is. Izuku presses himself up, catching sight of his yellow backpack crumpled beside him, where he must have dropped it. He gives it a nostalgic once-over before he throws it on, feeling a little off balance. Okay, time for some recon. It doesn't matter that it's the middle of a school day or that Izuku is technically skipping classes. He needs to start planning, and to do that, he needs information. Izuku heads for the roof. He remembers Aldera's lack of security and the way the rooftop door was always unlocked. It'll be easier to leave from there than to try walking out the front doors. Izuku remembers a time when he was actually young enough to go to this school, how he would sneak up to the rooftop to hide from bullies so he could eat his lunch in peace. He remembers being caught once, how the janitor had seen Izuku going to the rooftop after hours, and instead of stopping him, instead of asking why a 13-year-old boy would be going up to a rooftop by himself, he turned away from Izuku and left without saying a word. Izuku absolutely hates this place. Halfway up the stairs, Izuku throws caution to the wind and starts sprinting up the steps, his footsteps bouncing up the stairwell and echoing off the walls. His heart is racing in his chest. He feels out of breath and spellbound with the repercussions of what he's just done, of what they've just accomplished. By the time he reaches the roof access door, Izuku is feeling almost frantic, his skin buzzing and his ears ringing. The door slams open under his jittery hands, cracking the cement wall, but Izuku hardly notices. Because the next moment, he's running, letting one for all race up his legs as he leaps off the rooftop of his old middle school. Izuku doesn't even have a destination in mind when he starts running. He takes in the whole and thriving city around him, the lack of decay and rubble, the color and vibrancy, the life. The way that civilians bustle around each other, bumping elbows and trading words, walking and talking, unaware of what waits for them in the shadows. Izuku's hindbrain takes over as he runs, yellow backpack jarring into his ribs, lungs burning in his chest. He winds the streets and tries not to feel overwhelmed at the sight of breathing, happy, vulnerable, living, defenseless, innocent, alive, people all around him. It isn't exactly surprising when he ends up on Dagoba Beach. For some reason, however, it does catch Izuku off guard when instead of coming up to a clear expanse of sand, ocean, and sky, all he can see is trash and garbage, a junkyard that Izuku remembers cleaning up with his own two hands. Izuku climbs into the rubble without hesitation, jumping over piles of trash and scaling over mountains of garbage. And then Izuku sinks down into the sand, hidden behind an overturned refrigerator and a burnt-out husk of a car. He digs through his backpack for his phone, pulling up the calendar with numb, trembling fingers. For years, Izuku has traveled back 4 years in time, which means he is 14 right now, over a month away from the sludge villain incident and his first meeting with All Might. Almost a full year from the entrance exam into UE. Izuku breathes in a breath that tastes more of garbage than salt water. He's trembling all over, elated and relieved, exhausted and wary, overjoyed and terrified. But under it all, so thankful to have this second chance. "I'll save you," Izuku whispers to no one, whispers to everyone. He hunches over himself, presses his knees into his folded arms, curling his hands against his chest. "It will be all right," he murmurs against the wind, "because I am here." Izuku ends up sitting on the beach until the sun is sinking below the horizon in yellow-pink rays, and the breeze coming off the waves has left him chilled and shivering. He had pulled out his hero analysis for the future number 13 hours ago and started jotting down half-formed plans and ideas. Frantic and half-hysterical as he sat there in the trash and sand. He drew up a timeline of all the major events, noting down anything he could remember, trying to recall every blood-soaked, fear-drenched detail, so he could prevent them from happening this time around. The notebook is mostly filled now, and Izuku's right hand is cramped and aching. The League of Villains needs to be taken out before they can gain any sort of support or traction. Once they start making an army of Nomu to unleash on the heroes. Once the Doctor starts on Quirk replication. Once they start kidnapping heroes and using them against their former allies, that's when there is no going back. Izuku can't let it get that far. The USJ was their first encounter. Izuku remembers it clearly, so many battles ago, but still stark in his memory, the League's debut. It was one of the only instances where Shigaraki was vulnerable enough for Izuku to reach. They got smarter after that. Shigaraki stayed in the shadows and bided his time, planning and waiting for the prime opportunity to strike. The USJ is Izuku's best option for nabbing Shigaraki. Otherwise, he'll have to throw the timeline to the wind and take some drastic measures in order to take down the League. The idea of having to wait a year before he can make a move on Shigaraki leaves Izuku feeling dizzy and sick with apprehension and despondency. But he doesn't actually know where All for One or Shigaraki are right now, and he doesn't want to disrupt the timeline too soon and throw off future events before he absolutely has to. Izuku needs to be smart about this. He needs to plan carefully. He needs to be methodical and tactful. He needs to be patient. This is their second chance. There will not be a third. In the midst of everything, the unsurmountable relief that their plan worked. The discomfort that came with being in his 14-year-old body again. The terrifying realization that he was back in time all alone, and he would have to face the League by himself. Between all of that, Izuku forgot. He forgot that his mom would be at home, waiting for him. "Izuku," she calls as he walks through the door, and Izuku feels the breath punch out of his lungs. He staggers in the doorway for a moment, has to grab the doorframe for support as his legs threaten to buckle from under him. Fingers cracking at drywall, eyes stinging and heart pounding. Izuku should have prepared himself for this, but he was distracted, and he had forgotten. His mom is here. God, he's missed his mom so much. "Izuku," she calls again, concerned this time, and that breaks Izuku out of his frozen stupor. He stumbles down the hall and into the kitchen, the smell of cooking rice and steaming vegetables thick in the air. And there she is, wrapped in her favorite apron, her hair thrown up into a bun, looking at Izuku with big, worried eyes. Izuku might be a survivor of war and genocide, a seasoned hero with multiple quirks under his skin and scars over the top. But he can't help it when the tears spill over at the sight of his mama, here and alive in front of him. "Izuku," she cries, dashing forward to anxiously grab at him. Izuku intercepts her before she can begin checking him over for bumps or bruises. He wraps his arms around her and pulls her in, holding his mom tightly to his chest and pressing his face into her shoulder. "Izuku," she asks worriedly, hands petting at his hair and back, trying to soothe him. "Sweetie, what's going on? What's wrong?" Izuku shakes his head, his chest hitching with the sobs he's suppressing. "And nothing's wrong. I just what? Just came back from the future. Just haven't seen you for nearly 2 years. Just forgot that you would be here and alive. I've just had an overwhelming day," Izuku finally chokes out. Which is true, which is so irrefutably, undeniably true, but it still tastes like a lie leaving his lips. "Oh, honey," his mom coos, and then she's squeezing him back, holding onto him with the same force he's clinging to her. Izuku chokes on a noise he didn't know he could make. I love you so much. You know that, right?" he asks, because he wants her to know. He has to make sure she knows. Because he never got to make sure before. Before it was too late, before she was gone. "That I love you." His mom makes a confused and watery sound in his ear, but her voice is hard when she replies. "Yes, I know. I know." She pulls away slightly, her hands coming up to cup both of Izuku's cheeks so she can look him in the eye. "And I love you too, Izuku." She brushes his tears away even as her own roll down her cheeks. "You've always had all my love, sweetheart." Izuku squeezes his eyes shut, aching so deeply inside of himself that he can't remember how to breathe for a moment. His mom holds him through it, running her hands through his hair and whispering little reassurances in his ear, until Izuku pulls away just enough to move the burning vegetables off the stove before they can catch fire. When Izuku glances back to his mom, she still looks anxious and concerned, hands fluttering around like she wants to reach out to Izuku and hold him again. Izuku takes one of her hands in his own, lacing their fingers together. Even now, in his 14-year-old body, his hands are bigger than hers, his fingers longer. He wonders in the back of his mind what she would think of him. If she knew, if she could see him for the man, the hero, he grew to be. She didn't get the chance to see him grow up the first time around. Izuku wonders if she still would have found it in herself to be proud, even with knowing he failed. Can we take a day, he asks, chewing on his lip as he tries to rein all his broken pieces back in. Can we just take a day tomorrow? No work, no school. Just one day, you and me? His mom stares at him for a moment, gaze searching and coming up with even more questions. Izuku can see it the way that she wants to ask, wants to know what's going on. But instead, because his mama has always known when to push and when to let things go, she agrees tentatively, her other hand coming up to tuck some of Izuku's stray curls behind his ear. "All right," she says, we can do that." Izuku leans in to wrap her up into another hug, wishing that he was wider, that he was taller, that he was bigger and harder, that he was his whole entire self. "Thank you," he says, biting back all the other words he wants to say. Izuku and his mom stay in the next day. They wake up late and don't bother to change out of their pajamas. They end up curled together on the couch as they marathon All Might movies. Popcorn and takeaway cartons littering their coffee table. The day leaves Izuku feeling safe and content and warm. He sits there for a while, his mom asleep on his shoulder, the muted sounds of one of his favorite movies playing in the background, and Izuku ponders. He tries to remember the last time he felt safe in his own skin, the last time he wasn't on high alert, the last time he fell asleep without wondering what was hiding in the dark. He comes up blank. He wonders how long he can make this feeling last. 3 weeks later, in the lamplight of his childhood bedroom, Izuku makes a decision. The clock is slowly crawling toward 4 a.m., and Izuku has to be up for school in a mere 3 hours. But that feels like a far-off, distant thing in comparison to everything else Izuku is facing. He sat curled up on his bed, stacks of papers and pens littered across his bright sheets, staring up at the All Might posters hung on his walls, feeling a resigned sort of determination filling up his chest. He has a new notebook filled with plans and strategies and contingencies if all else fails. It's written in a code that perhaps only Nizu himself could break. Though Izuku doubts anyone will raid a 14-year-old's notebook in the hopes of finding a systematic takedown of an unknown villain organization. He has plans and backup plans for his backup plans. He's been going over it all for weeks now, trying to take into account every variable, to think in every convoluted and abstract way imaginable, so he won't miss a single possibility. Izuku needs to cover all his bases, to prepare for every option, to consider every detail. Nothing can be left to chance. Except, well, there's always a chance, isn't there? A chance that this was all for nothing. A chance that Izuku will fail. A chance that Izuku will die. So contingencies. When Izuku went back in time, he took all of his quirks with him, including, of course, One for All. Even if his current body lacks the muscle tone and stamina he built up over the years, it still remembers how to use One for All. And Izuku is working on gaining that muscle and strength back. Dagobah Beach is already showing the results of his rigorous training. The point is, Izuku already has One for All. Right now, All Might is searching for a worthy successor to pass his quirk down to. In 15 days, he is supposed to meet a quirkless boy by chance and choose him as said successor. Izuku has to make sure that does not happen. If Izuku and Tashinori never meet under that bridge, if Izuku never gets attacked by the sludge villain, if he never saves Kakin and impresses All Might, then he does not receive One for All. Instead, All Might would meet with Sir Nightai like he was supposed to all those years ago. He would be introduced to Sir Nightai's latest intern, a bright and courageous young hero who hopes to save 1,000,000 people one day. And most likely, Tashinori would pass One for All down to Mirio and begin training him as his new successor. This is what Izuku needs to happen. It kills him inside, thinking about giving up that relationship with All Might with Tashinori. To never have that bond with him. To not have him there, in Izuku's corner. There by Izuku's side until the end. But if Izuku can live through the loss of the man once, he can do so again, no matter how much it hurts. Lemillion will make a great successor to All Might and a wonderful symbol of peace. He was an amazing hero and friend in Izuku's time. And maybe with One for All coursing through his veins, Mirio will live long enough to save 1,000,000 people like he always dreamed of. This way, if Izuku can't make good on his promises, if Izuku fails once again, if he dies along the way, then One for All does not die with him. This way, Izuku will have left the world with a fighting chance. Izuku stares down at his scarless hands, watching the flickering light of One for All dancing along his skin. And then he looks up at the face of his once mentor smiling down at him, and Izuku makes a choice. "I'm sorry," Izuku says, feeling raw and ripped open, and so very tired. "I'm sorry," he says again, tears blurring the image of All Might into a kaleidoscope of colors. "I'll never stop being sorry." Izuku wouldn't say he settles into his new routine, more like he drifts through it in a numb sort of detachment. It's harder than he thought it would be, pretending to be a kid again, to put on a face day in and day out. It's tiring in a way that Izuku hadn't been expecting. Every moment he isn't in school, Izuku uses either to train rigorously or to agonize over his plans. He finds himself lying awake at night, staring up at the ceiling, either plagued by nightmares of his past, soon-to-be future, if he isn't careful, or with his mind racing with anxieties and possibilities. His thoughts drift during class, caught in the monotony of junior high and the escalating sleep deprivation. If his teachers cared about the quirkless kid in the back, they might have called Izuku out on his lack of participation. But now that Izuku doesn't bring his notebooks to school and his muttering habit has seemingly disappeared, they tend to leave him alone as long as Izuku stays in his lane and doesn't get in anyone else's way. The kids, on the other hand, are just as vicious as Izuku remembers. Izuku is good at blending into the shadows and disappearing into the crowd, something he was skillful at even as an actual 14-year-old. And though Izuku can avoid most physical confrontation, there are times that he is cornered, and he has to sit and take it, pretending that he can't fight back. But Izuku can take physical pain. That was something he learned back in his childhood and something that carried him through many battles. Izuku can deal with cuts and bruises. What is harder to ignore, however, are the words, "useless," Good for nothing? No. Worthless. Waste of space. Geneless. Deku. That's another thing Izuku hadn't been expecting. The clench of his chest and the twist in his gut that came with hearing his hero name uttered with such contempt. The way his throat closes up whenever the name is used here. Always said with disgust and hatred, like a curse or a disease, something to be ashamed of. Deku hasn't been any one of those things in years. Izuku took back the name Deku and made it his own, rebranded it and gave it a new meaning. Deku was something to be proud of. Deku was a hero. Deku was hope. But here, that Deku doesn't exist. Here, Deku is nothing. Izuku doesn't know when, exactly, he began sneaking up to the roof to spend his lunch periods alone. But he's not even been back at Aldera for a full month yet, and it seems he's already fallen into past habits and old coping mechanisms. Izuku has fought in one of the bloodiest and cruelest wars to have ever plagued the world. He's watched helplessly as hero society crumbled before them, and as nations toppled soon after. Izuku has seen people torn apart by monsters, and he has held friends as the light bled out from their eyes. Izuku has been through horrible, unspeakable things. And yet, here Izuku is sneaking to the rooftop of his middle school, just like he did as a kid, so he won't have to hear the mocking jeers or whispered insults of his classmates. Hiding from the name Deku, Izuku scoffs at himself, kicking his feet lightly where they hang off the ledge, his heels scuffing against the wall. He wonders what his friends would think of him if they saw him now, sleep-deprived and anxiety-ridden, lips bitten raw and muscles aching, wrapped up in the blacks of Aldera and a deceptively childish face. The fate of the entire world and a few discriminatory words weighing him down. Except, well, even in such a self-deprecating mood, Izuku knows his friends, and he can't imagine them being anything but supportive and understanding. Tenya would help Izuku to either take his mind off of things or try his best to lighten Izuku's load. Ochako would wrap Izuku in a hug before she went to go threaten those bothering him. Never mind the fact that they are 14-year-olds. Hitoshi would tell him to quit it with the self-flagellation already, and then probably go help Ochako scare a bunch of 8th graders. And Shoto would come and just sit quietly with Izuku up here on this ledge, sharing in his company and silent support. But they aren't here. And well, that's the real problem, isn't it? Izuku looks up to the blue sky, blinking bright, glittering sunspots from his eyes. A cold breeze plays with his hair, blows at his clothes, urging him toward the edge. I forgot what it was like to be alone, Izuku realizes with a jolt. Too many emotions to name colliding in his chest. Longing and sadness, regret and loneliness, anger and guilt. But the most striking of them all is the sharp-edged blade of grief that hits him full force in the center of his chest. Hard enough to knock the air straight from Izuku's lungs, to leave him dizzy and gasping for breath. Izuku presses one hand to his heaving chest, the other clutches at the ledge of the building, trying to keep his balance, keep his bearings. He hunches over himself, half bent over his knees and struggling for air. He starts, but chokes on the words, his vision gone blurry and spotted. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this without you, he admits, wishing, wanting, needing someone here by his side. How am I? Izuku starts, breath shuddering out of him, voice wavering with each word. What if I'm not hard enough, or cue quick enough, or smart enough? Izuku asks. What if it happens again? What if I let it happen again? Izuku whispers, hand pressed over his quivering mouth. What if I can't do this on my own? The icy wind whips at Izuku's face, cooling the tears on his cheeks and blowing his hair into his eyes. He blinks against it, wrapping his arms around himself and trying to remember how to breathe. What if I fail again? Only a month into his new training plan, and already Dagoba Beach is starting to show Izuku's hard work. At the rate he's going, Izuku will be done cleaning it up in half the time it took him the first go-around. Of course, this time, he has both muscle memory and various quirks under his skin to make the process easier. Though he is doing most of the heavy lifting quirkless, being that the whole point of this is to gain back the muscle and stamina that his body forgot. So while most things are easier this time around, other things are much, much harder. Izuku can't seem to stop glancing over his shoulder, looking for someone who is not there. He catches himself talking to thin air, waiting for an answer that will not come. His eyes flit about, searching for a head of blonde hair and a beaming smile, only to remember after a shocked moment that he is alone. Izuku grits his teeth, shaking his head at himself and blinking the past out of his eyes. In it, he hisses, jumping down from his perch on a stack of old tires. Izuku paces back and forth on the sand, running jittery hands through his tangled hair. Izuku lets out a shout, and with an angry burst of one for all he kicks at a rusted carburetor, watching as it flies forward and skitters over the water like a skipping stone, before sinking to the bottom of the sea. Izuku huffs a breath at himself, scrubbing a hand over his face before he scoops up his backpack and makes his way toward the stairs leading down to the beach. He can't concentrate when he's like this, and yelling and throwing things isn't going to do anything but draw unwanted attention. Izuku practically collapses down onto the steps, bag thumping against his shins. He pulls out his bento box, angrily popping some onigiri into his mouth as he glares out at the ocean. He feels caught between time, like the memories have been twisted up and jumbled inside of him, and Izuku's mind can't make sense of them. There is the part of him that is constantly reminding himself that his version of Tashinori is gone, that it's stupid to get caught looking over his shoulder for a man long dead. But then there is the other part of him that whispers that All Might is out there right now, alive and breathing and still fighting. And that same traitorous part of him keeps wondering why it is, if Tashinori is alive, that he isn't here by Izuku's side. Because he is not yours and you are not his, Izuku has to remind himself. Because he doesn't know you. And if things go right, then he may never need to know you. Izuku hisses through his teeth as he bites into the palm of his hand, his eyes stinging and his skin burning. He stares out into the waves, glittering in the rays of the lowering sun. This was his starting ground, this illegal trash heap of a beach. But it had never felt as much like a chore as it does now, and it had never ever felt this lonely. Ever since Izuku made his decision to not meet Tashinori this time around, he's been second-guessing himself, wondering if he's making the right choice, if he won't end up regretting it later. And the thing is, Izuku knows he will regret it because he's already dreading it now. But at the same time, Izuku knows that it's the right thing to do. The smart thing, the only thing he can do. But he still hates it. And he hates every hour that brings him nearer to the day he will be on an intersecting path with Tashinori. And instead of meeting him halfway, Izuku will have to force himself to turn and walk away. That's not the whole of it, though, because when Izuku is being honest with himself, he knows what is really bothering him. And that is that Tashinori, his Tashinori, is gone. He's gone, and there is nothing that Izuku can do about it. Even if he did throw his meticulously thought-out plan to the wind, even if Izuku went out and found Tashinori right this very second, he wouldn't know Izuku. He wouldn't remember him. All their shared history, everything that they lived through together, everything they fought for at each other's side. Izuku can't get that back, and part of him doesn't even want to. Because it was all of that, their time with one another, their shared timeline, their years spent together, that lead to All Might's death. It's a no-win scenario, and Izuku has gone through enough no-win scenarios to know that they never get easier to live through. Izuku angles his head up toward the sky, closing his eyes as he lets the sun heat up his face. Everything is not all right, he murmurs, voice getting lost to the waves and wind. Because you're not here. Kaken's palm singes the material of Izuku's school uniform, making a puff of smoke rise up and sting at his eyes. He can feel the heat of it sinking into his shoulder, leaving small blisters behind. But Izuku doesn't flinch away, not from Kaken. It's been difficult to be around Kaken these past few weeks. Hard to brush off his words, and to pretend the way he treats Izuku doesn't hurt. He still remembers the grown version of his friend, the Kaken that helped push Izuku past his limits. The Kaken that grew and became the hero Izuku always knew he could be. The Kaken that held him after they lost Ochako. The Kaken that Izuku left behind when he came back to the past. He misses Kaken, but Kaken is right here. Here's a little word of advice, nerd, he says, hands still burning Izuku's shoulder. Don't even think of applying to Yui. Got it? He lets go of Izuku then, walking away as the two other boys mock Izuku from the sidelines. Izuku stands there, waiting, because he knows what comes next. You know, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it, Kaken says, and Izuku closes his eyes against the words he knows by heart. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof. In the previous timeline, Izuku had tried to stand up for himself, incensed and bitter on his own behalf. But he was too scared to stand his ground, intimidated by Kaken and his hot temper and even hotter hands. This time, however, he doesn't let it go. What if I did, he asks, voice just above a whisper, but not wavering in the slightest. Huh? Kaken's voice comes from the doorway, but Izuku isn't facing him. He's staring out the classroom's windows, hands hung loosely at his sides. What if I did jump? Izuku asks. What if I did kill myself? At this, Izuku turns slightly, looking at Kaken over his smoldering shoulder. Would you be a hero then? What did you just say to me? Kaken seethes, stomping forward a couple steps, sparks popping from his palms. But Izuku is not intimidated. He is 18 years old and has faced down far greater threats than the angry adolescent version of his childhood friend. Izuku is teaching a lesson here. He is making a point, one that he hopes gets through his friend's thick skull. Izuku strolls over to the open window, the one that Kaken had thrown his notebook out of in the previous timeline. Though Izuku no longer brings his notebooks to school, too aware of the sensitive information they hold, Izuku pushes the window open wide, glancing down the 3 stories to the ground far below. Heroes are meant to make people feel safe. They're meant to help the helpless. Izuku locks eyes with Kaken, green meeting red. To protect the ones who can't protect themselves, Izuku lifts himself up onto the sill, his legs dangling outside the window. He hears twin gasps from behind him, hears Kaken rushing forward, shoving desks and chairs out of his way as he half snarls, half chokes, Deku dash. What kind of hero do you want to be, Kaken? Izuku asks, and then he lets himself drop. He hears Kaken yell out from behind him, but Izuku is already falling, wind whipping at his clothes and snatching at his backpack. He uses float right before he can hit the ground, and then Izuku is running, one for all buzzing along his skin as he dashes down the street. Izuku hops over the koi pond and dodges around the gate, his heart racing and his thoughts spinning too quickly for him to grab onto. He knows he'll pay for that stunt tomorrow, that there's no way Kaken is going to let something like that go. But Izuku couldn't pass up the opportunity to knock some sense into his friend. His backpack jars into his ribs as Izuku runs, his shoes slapping against the concrete as Izuku pushes himself to go faster. The adrenaline of doing something so risky has him buzzing. Izuku almost heads straight for the beach, where he can get out some of his pent-up energy. But he doesn't want to ruin his uniform, and his mom will be, oh, Izuku gasps, coming to an abrupt stop so quickly he actually stumbles. Oh no, he mumbles, staring up at the very familiar underpass. I'm not supposed to be here. He had forgotten in his haste to teach Kaken a lesson and get away from the school. It had been on his mind all week, every hour of every day. Izuku could feel the countdown like a physical weight pressing down on him. He can't believe he'd forgotten, even for a moment. Today is the day of the sludge villain attack. Today is the day Izuku meets All Might. Today is the day that changes Izuku's life forever. Today is the day that started it all. Today is... Izuku swallows dryly against the lump in his throat. The adrenaline from before is fading, and Izuku is left cold and floundering without it, stuck between what he wants to do for himself and what he needs to do for the world. He stands there for another long moment, knees locked and lungs burning, mourning for what he used to have, mourning for what he is about to lose, mourning because he knows nothing will ever be the same again. Izuku presses a trembling fist to his mouth and lets out a strangled sob, tears stinging hotly at his eyes. I'm sorry, Tashinori, he whispers into the echoing tunnel, and then, before he can second-guess himself again, Izuku turns away and runs. Izuku paces back and forth on the beach, as he's been doing for hours now. Long past when All Might must have been pursuing the sludge villain. Long enough that the chances of Izuku running into them have passed. Even longer still, from that one life-altering moment. His mom must be getting worried, Izuku knows distantly. It's well past dark, and Izuku's stomach is cramping with hunger pains. He should go home, apologize to his mother, and try to eat a few bites of food. Move on from this day of bad memories and excruciating choices. But the thought of heading home and having to act normal is almost as nauseating as the situation itself. Running jittery hands through his tangled hair and taking a breath, Izuku tries to pull himself together. But he can't seem to rein himself in any more than he can ignore his shot nerves or frayed emotions, and no amount of time or determination can make the grief in his heart easier to bear. Izuku pauses, his hands fisted at his sides, fingernails biting into his palms. Suddenly, it isn't sadness or desperation or even terror that he feels, it's anger. Raw, unadulterated rage. It washes over him so quickly it's all Izuku can do not to choke on it. The burning hot feeling of resentment, the thick coiling feeling of confinement come out of hiding from somewhere deep inside of him, mixing together and building inside of Izuku until it becomes too much for him to hold inside. And then Izuku is screaming, something rageful and agonized and bleeding. It is not a cry of sorrow or fear, but something of pure, unyielding pain. Even to Izuku's own ears, it sounds like a call for vengeance, a bay for blood. The stench of garbage is far more tolerable than the bitter vitriol pouring out of his mouth. But Izuku can't find it in himself to care. Can't make himself stop. Let the world hear his rage. Let it bear the weight of his pain. Because it is this world that has taken so much from Izuku. And it is this world that has placed an insurmountable weight on his shoulders. And it is this world that has demanded that he do it again, but this time, that he do so alone. Izuku screams until he is lost for breath. And then he screams some more. Destiny is a funny thing. It is not as solid as people would have you think. It is fluid and ever-changing. There is no fate, no set path, no script written in the stars. Destiny is a choice. Izuku used to think his destiny was to be All Might's successor, to become the new symbol of peace, to stand in the way of evil. And he did all those things. He fought against evil, and he followed in All Might's footsteps. And where he could not be a symbol of peace, he became a symbol of hope. Instead, Izuku fulfilled those destinies, but he has a new one now. Izuku is going to save the world, or he'll die trying. Izuku has a myriad of quirks to choose from when it comes to picking out the one he will use for his quirk registration form. The problem, however, is trying to choose which one he wants to represent to Yui. There are certain quirks Izuku, of course, cannot use in front of any of the Yui staff or students without major suspicion arising. Then there were a few other quirks that Izuku eventually crossed off his list of candidates. So that leaves him with 8 quirks to choose from. Fa Gene is a very good offensive ability, and Izuku would succeed while using it. But he's so used to pairing it up with One for All, he isn't sure he wouldn't accidentally slip up and use both at the same time. Danger Sense is a useful quirk, and one that has saved Izuku's life countless times. But he likes to keep that one in his back pocket, better for no one to know. He can sense a blow before it can land. Shelter is a very powerful quirk. Being able to make force fields to protect himself and others has saved Izuku and his friends over and over again. Without it, Izuku knows he'd be dead 10 times over. But Shelter has no offensive capabilities. It is purely a defensive quirk. Smokescreen is much the same. It works well for espionage and covert missions and for escaping enemies. But it would be hard to get into Yui with only smoke on his side. Mirage is out for the same reason. While being able to make illusions of himself has been very useful at distracting enemies, it is not an offensive quirk. Izuku's clones aren't actually physical. They cannot talk or touch anything, so not very helpful in a fight. Aoi Hinu is the complete opposite. Fire is an extremely useful ability to have in battle. But Izuku still has trouble controlling the quirk, and he would hesitate to use the ability while in the same class as Shoto. Float is another quirk Izuku has become reliant on. Being able to use aerial attacks on enemies or evacuate civilians through the air has been quite literally life-saving. Float is integral to Izuku's current fighting style. But without the strength enhancements to launch himself through the air, would Float be as useful? There is a possibility that Izuku could use another quirk in combination with Float to make it more battle-capable. But no, he shouldn't risk that, not with so many eyes on him. That leaves Izuku with one option. Black Whip. Izuku lets some of the black tendrils curl out from his arms, watching the way they move and shift as he breathes. He's been training with Black Whip for years now. He remembers after he first got it, sitting down with Fumikage and learning how to meditate, how to rein in his emotions and control them. Black Whip had been frightening at first, most of all probably because of how Izuku got it. But now, years after its first manifestation, Black Whip just feels like an old friend. Izuku picks up his pen, lets out a breath, and finishes filling out his form. When Izuku walks through the gates of Yui, he can't help it when he falters. He stares up at the wide, gleaming expanse of his old school and tries his best not to drown under the sudden influx of memories. It's an overwhelming flood of feelings and emotions inside Izuku's brain, tangling up Izuku's thoughts and leaving him floundering and breathless. Izuku chokes on the memories for a moment, trying not to GG against them, because for a single heartbeat, just a fraction of a second, when Izuku looks up at Yui, all he can see is a shattered husk of a building looming in the sky, with black soot and red blood staining its walls. He can still taste the ash on his tongue, can smell the sulfur staining the air. Izuku blinks, and suddenly, he's back in time, staring up at the remains of Yui. Their last true defense, up in flames and half-collapsed, sparks and dust drifting up into the starlit sky. The silence somehow far more damning than a scream could have ever been. All gone. All gone. It's all gone. Out of my way, Deku, a familiar voice suddenly sneers from behind him. Izuku flinches as he's sharply yanked out of his memories. He breathes out a stuttering exhale, the tips of his fingers tingling, his head buzzing. Izuku blinks the nightmare away and pushes all of his hurts back under his skin where they belong. He needs to get his head on straight. He needs to pull himself together. "Good morning, Kakin," he replies, inclining his head in a polite nod. Kakin doesn't spare him a passing glance. "Get out of my way before I set you on fire." Izuku smirks, lips quirking up just the slightest bit. Now this he can deal with. This is familiar. "I'm sure the teachers here at Yui would love to see that," he says lowly. And then, "Good luck on the exam, Katsuki." Izuku walks away before Kakin can reply, but he catches sight of the other boy's face. The irritation and confusion that's pulling at his mouth and shadowing his eyes, the scowl that sets into the contours of his face. Irritation and confusion have pretty much been Kakin's default response to Izuku these past 11 months. Though that's probably warranted, Izuku growing a backbone and some self-confidence, seemingly overnight, had to come as a shock to everyone at Aldera, most of all Kakin. He stopped harassing Izuku quite as much after the window stunt he pulled. Though, in those moments where Kakin's temper did reach a boiling point and Izuku was within the same vicinity, Izuku was either very good at disappearing or very good at dodging. Izuku could see it in random moments throughout this past year. The way that Kakin has been watching him, how his eyes will linger a little bit too long, how he seems to be searching for something in those stolen glances at Izuku. Kakin is smart and observant. Perhaps he's not at the same level as Izuku himself. But even at this age, Kakin's instincts and intellect are nothing to scoff at. He knows that something is wrong with Izuku. That much is certain. Izuku is just waiting for the day Kakin's curiosity finally outweighs his pride, and he demands answers. Izuku feels more grounded in the present now, after his interaction with Kakin. He finds himself thankful to the other boy for snapping him out of it. If Kakin hadn't interrupted Izuku's spiraling thoughts, Izuku isn't sure he would have been able to unglue his feet from the entrance gate. Which is, well, ridiculous really. There is no choice here. There is no other option. Izuku needs to get into Yui. He needs to join the hero course, so he can defeat the League. so he can protect his friends, so he can save his family. Izuku pulls in a deep breath and rolls his shoulders back, lifting his head and standing tall. I can do this, he mutters to himself, finding his resolve. I have to do this. Wow, a voice chimes in from his left. You sure are confident. I wish I felt the same way. I'm pretty nervous. Izuku freezes, his determined smile catching on his face as butterflies burst in his stomach and flutter up to his chest. Everything in him stops as he turns to see brown hair and rosy cheeks and a soft smile aimed his way. The sight of Ochako almost knocks the air straight from Izuku's lungs. He tried his best to prepare himself for today, not wanting a repeat of what happened when he first saw his mom. But it's different in the actual moment, suddenly coming face to face with the younger version of one of his best friends. It physically hurts not being allowed to lunge for Ochako and pull her in, to wrap his arms around her and hold on to her with all his might. Izuku's chest is tight, his eyes burn. He wants nothing more than to give Ochako a hug. But instead, because Ochako does not know him here. Instead, because Izuku is not a child, though he feels like one in this moment. Instead, because Izuku is a hero and he has a job to do. Instead, Izuku puts a smile on his face and says, "Don't be fooled, my confidence isn't as unwavering as I'd like it to be." Ochako gives him a bright smile, eyes crinkling and cheeks dimpling as she laughs. It's pretty nerve-wracking, isn't it? Just the building itself is intimidating. Izuku nods, pulling open the door for her before he follows close behind. Suddenly his nerves about returning to Yui feel small and distant. Though maybe that isn't all that surprising. Ochako has always been able to give Izuku a boost of courage whenever he's needed it. God, he's missed her so much. We could walk together if you want, he offers, almost desperately hoping she doesn't turn him away. To be here, talking to her again. To hear her voice, even if it's higher-pitched. Even if she's younger, with baby fat still in her cheeks and innocence still lacing her eyes. To have her here, standing right in front of him. It leaves Izuku feeling like he's floating, like he's flying, like he's dreaming. Sure, Ochako chirps, bouncing on the toes of her shoes. She throws Izuku a glance before she reaches between them, hand extended. I'm Uraraka Ochako, by the way, she introduces herself. It's nice to meet you. Izuku takes her hand, and it feels like an old memory and a new beginning all at the same time. For a moment, Izuku wonders what Ochako would think, how she would react if she knew. If she knew that the last time Izuku was with her, she was bleeding out in his arms. If she knew that the last time he talked to her, she was breathless and dying and staring up at Izuku like he was their only hope. If she knew that the last time he touched her, he had pressed his fingers into her skin and taken her quirk from her. Please, Deku Izuku. Izuku-kun, please take it. Take my quirk. Before it's too late. What would this version of Ochako say if she knew that Izuku held her quirk under his skin? Midoriya Izuku. Izuku shakes her hand, introducing himself to one of his best friends as if she doesn't already live inside his heart. It's nice to meet you, Uraraka-san. The three-pointer's head pops off with a hiss of smoke and a crackle of sparks. Izuku flips off of its head and shoots out. More tendrils of black whip. They smash into the red sensors of another robot's face, and it immediately shudders to a stop and tips over. Izuku vaguely wonders how he would have done, the first time around, if he had known about the shutdown sensors. Actually, he wonders how everyone with non-combative quirks would do if they knew about the weak points. But figuring that out is just another part of the test. It feels like cheating a little bit to be competing against untrained teenagers when Izuku has years of practice and experience under his belt, not to mention insider information. Izuku keeps having to remind himself that he is only reclaiming his own spot in the hero course, not stealing anyone else's. Plus, well, the fate of the world and hero society are depending on Izuku right now. He can't take chances here. Izuku scales up the side of a building and surveys the area around him, searching for enemies and people in trouble. One for all thrums under his skin, Izuku can almost taste the spark of it on the back of his tongue. But Izuku doesn't dare use it while under the watchful eyes of Yui. Even if All Might wouldn't notice, Nizu and Aizawa certainly would. Just as Izuku is about to drop back down to street level, he notices two robots flanking a student. A boy in all black, with familiar lilac hair and a limp in his step. Izuku doesn't hesitate. He takes off in a dead sprint, jumping across rooftops and flipping over alleyways with reckless abandon. And when Izuku is close enough, he flings himself off the edge of the building in something that might technically be a tad too daring for an untrained 15-year-old. Well, it's not every day that you get to re-meet one of your best friends. Izuku lands on the head of the three-pointer as he grabs Hitoshi with a strand of black whip, pulling him out of reach of the two-pointer. Izuku hoists Hitoshi up into the air where he won't get caught in any of the debris, and then Izuku kicks off of the robot, forcing it to crash into its friend. Izuku sets Hitoshi down on the other side of the street, shooting him a sheepish but friendly smile. "Sorry for grabbing you like that." Izuku apologizes, his eyes surveying his friend for any injuries. "Look like you might need some help." It's the wrong thing to say. Izuku forgot for a moment that this Hitoshi is not his friend. That right now, Hitoshi doesn't know him. He forgot for a moment that at this age, Hitoshi is bitter and spiteful, angry at the world for knocking him down over and over again. He forgot for a moment that this Hitoshi is still a lonely kid with something to prove. Hitoshi pushes himself up roughly, wobbly on what Izuku thinks must be a sprained ankle. "Yeah, thanks," he spits. "Shouldn't you be getting back to racking up points? Or are you so confident that you'll get into the heroics course?" Izuku just watches Hitoshi for a moment, taking in the dark bags under his eyes and the bitten raw fingernails, his dirt-smeared chin, and the newly yellowed bruise on his cheek. Izuku's chest aches for the friend he left behind, and aches for the boy who is standing right in front of him. Izuku pulls his thoughts away from that spiraling path, forcing his gaze to snap away from Hitoshi's angry glare and red-rimmed eyes. Izuku digs through his pockets, his fingers quickly wrapping around the collapsible baton he brought with him. "This exam is really biased toward non-combative quirks," he says conversationally, flicking the baton out to its full length. Hitoshi watches Izuku warily. He jerks back when Izuku extends the baton toward him, gait unbalanced with his sprained ankle. He looks down at Izuku in confused suspicion, his fingers frozen just above the offered weapon. "It's unfair," Izuku goes on, "but there are always ways around that." Izuku jabs a finger toward a robot down the street. "Break half of the red sensors, and they'll go down." Hitoshi's brows furrow. He looks at the robots Izuku took out earlier, soaking in that new information. And then his fingers suddenly wrap around the baton, a determined glint filling his purple eyes. Izuku and Hitoshi share a smirk, and for an instant it feels just like old times. Izuku turns away, Black Whip already lifting him into the air. "Good luck," Izuku calls over his shoulder, and then he's launching himself back into the fight. It won't be enough, Izuku knows. There isn't enough time left for Hitoshi to get into the heroics course. But maybe he'll leave today feeling a little less disappointed. And later, when they're both in Yui, when Izuku finds him again, maybe Hitoshi won't feel as alone. By the time the zero-pointer comes out, Izuku knows he already has enough points to be allowed into the hero course. He has at least 40 combat points, and though he doesn't know how they determine rescue points, he's sure he has quite a few of those too. The ground shudders as the zero-pointer is released, and Izuku stands there, watching as it walks through buildings and sends debris falling to the street, feeling morbidly nostalgic. The other examinees shout in surprise and fear, tripping over each other as they flee the scene. Izuku catches a shock of electric blue and the rumble of engine-propelled legs out of his peripheral, and something stunned and delighted bursts in his chest. "Tenya," he whispers to himself, whipping around to see if he can catch sight of his friend in the midst of all the chaos. That's when he hears the scream. Izuku remembers Ochako crying out in the original timeline, both in shock and fear. But this time Ochako's voice cracks in the middle with tears, and Izuku can tell she's hurt. Something visceral and burning explodes in Izuku's chest, and suddenly he's moving. He can't be sure if the slight burst of One for All is visible along his skin. But that doesn't matter in this moment. His mind is screaming at him to keep Ochako safe, to protect her, to save her. Black Whip bursts from Izuku's arms, shooting out and grabbing onto two opposing buildings, and then he's slingshotting himself up into the sky. The wind whips against his face and hair, his eyes water and his face stings, and Izuku finds himself missing his mask, almost feeling naked without it. Even without the use of float or zero gravity, Izuku still soars through the air. One for all buzzing inside his veins, lighting up his whole body, screaming to be let free. Izuku hasn't felt this whole, this alive, this at home in his own skin in almost a year. It's invigorating, it's intoxicating, it's liberating. It's everything he's missed about being a hero. The face of the zero-pointer looms overhead, and Izuku gives a wordless yell as Black Whip erupts out of him. Tendrils lashing out and smashing through the sensors on the zero-pointer's face like a sword through flesh. The black tendrils shoot out the back of the zero-pointer's head, a flash of light, a burst of glass, and then a plume of smoke. Izuku watches it for a moment, suspended in the air, making sure it's going to tip backward. And then Izuku is falling, dropping out of the sky without the robot for Black Whip to hold on to. He plummets toward the ground, but unlike last time, Izuku isn't panicked and broken with the repercussions of his own power. The zero-pointer hits the ground before Izuku does, a vortex of dust and smoke rushing up with its sudden impact. Izuku throws his arms out wide as he's abruptly swallowed by the dust, adding his own smoke to the mix as a cover. Safe behind the cloud of smoke, Izuku lets float take over his body. He lands gently, feet sat back down on the pavement. Uraraka, he calls, already running toward her. I'm here, she calls back, coughing against the smoke and dust. I can't get out. It's all right, Izuku says, and then he's crouching down in front of Ochako, giving her one of his smiles. I'm here now. I'm gonna get you out. Ochako stares at Izuku with wide, teary eyes. Her mouth forms a small O as she gapes up at him, looking mystified and a little shocked. But well, it's not every day that you're almost trampled by a gigantic robot. It makes sense that Ochako would feel overwhelmed. Okay, she murmurs, that would be nice. Izuku nods, already thinking of the least painful way to get her out. He's pretty sure her leg is broken this time, with the way it's twisted under debris. Hey, Uraraka, he says as he begins clearing some of the rubble away, trying to distract her. What's your quirk? Am I quirk? Ochako asks, confused, her voice strained as the weight on her leg fluctuates. Yeah, Izuku says, feeling a little lightheaded at the sight of Ochako injured and pinned down. A part of his brain is screaming that they need to move, that they need to get out of this vulnerable position before the chance is taken away from them. Izuku keeps having to remind himself that this is just a test, that no one is hunting them down, waiting to rip them apart. But it's hard to shove down those instincts to stop his thoughts from spiraling. Would it be able to help us get you out? Izuku asks because he knows it would. He can get the rubble off, but her zero gravity would help to elevate her broken leg without jostling it any further. It's called zero gravity, Ochako says, giving a small whimper of pain when Izuku uses Black Whip to lift the last chunk of debris off. IT cancels out the gravity of anything I touch. Izuku doesn't have to feign his fascinated smile. Ochako has always been amazing. Wow, he breathes. That's a wonderful quirk. It'll be so useful in hero work. Can you use it on yourself? Ochako nods, tears of pain filling up her eyes. Why yes. But it makes me nauseous. Izuku grimaces. He knows how it feels to use zero gravity on yourself. He's been training with her quirk for over a year now, and he still gets nauseous. Can you use it on your leg? Maybe try it on your pants and shoe, Izuku instructs. If you take the weight off it, it'll be easier for me to carry you out of here. Okay, Ochako nods, having to stretch out at an odd angle in order to reach her shoe. She got it. Good job, Izuku says, and then he bends down to gently pick up his friend. I'll be careful, he murmurs, but it'll probably still hurt. Sorry. Ochako grimaces as Izuku picks her up, her face bleeding of all color. Izuku wonders for a moment if she's about to throw up on him. It's not your fault, she tells him, her eyes firmly squeezed shut. If anything, I should be thanking you. You saved me. Izuku hums distractedly, stepping over cracked pavement and random wreckage. You don't have to thank me, he says. You would do the same if you saw someone who needed help. Izuku glances over to Ochako, their faces only inches apart. That's why we're going to be heroes, isn't it? Ochako looks surprised as her eyes snap open to meet Izuku's. Her cheeks go pink even though the rest of her skin is still pale with pain and nausea. Why yeah? Yes, she whispers. That's why we're going to be heroes. Izuku gives her one of his more private smiles. Not the one that he used to flash at the cameras, or the one he wore during villain attacks, but one that feels soft and real on his face, one that he hasn't felt in a very long time. Izuku takes a deep breath, savoring this moment, and then he steps out into the light, dust and smoke trailing behind him. His acceptance letter comes a little over a week later. Izuku knows he got in, he's sure of it. But even with knowing that, he still just sort of stares at the letter for a long while. Tracing his fingers over the wax, his eyes scanning the white envelope over and over again. It feels like a lifetime ago, the first time Izuku had sat down and opened his acceptance letter. So much has changed since then. Izuku has changed so much since then. Even though he was expecting it, Izuku's stomach still flips at the sight of All Might's face appearing on screen. Yes. Hello. Is it working? He asks someone behind the camera, half of his form cropped out of the shot. Izuku chokes on a laugh that sort of sounds like a sob, staring up at the screen with something like grief, something like happiness, something like loss, clogging up his throat. Tashinori suddenly swivels back into frame. Yes. Hello. I am here. As a projection. Tashinori exclaims, fully in All Might mode. Congratulations, Midoriya Izuku. You have made it into Yui's Heroics program. You passed the written exam with flying colors, and you were able to obtain 53 combat points in the practical exam. This alone would have given you admittance into the hero course. Tashinori pauses, glancing at the camera and to Izuku. The weight of his gaze, even though this is pre-recorded, even though Tashinori isn't actually seeing him, even though this version of Tashinori doesn't even know him, makes Izuku's breath stutter and his heart clench. However, there were other factors. You see, the practical exam was not graded on combat alone. Tashinori spins around, gesturing to a screen behind him, which is showing Izuku taking down robots, and then handing Hitoshi his baton. For figuring out how the robots worked as well as successfully sneaking in a weapon, 27 espionage points. Izuku jerks back in his chair in surprise, blinking stupidly up at the projector. He hadn't known espionage points were even a thing. He remembered Aizawa mentioning that weapons were allowed, that you could either ask for permission to use support gear beforehand, or, if you were brave enough and you didn't get caught, then you could sneak some in yourself. So Izuku had decided to bring a few weapons with him, as well as some bandages and first aid items, just in case. But Izuku hadn't realized it was another aspect of the test. Izuku tunes back in as Tashinori goes on. And for unthinkingly helping others, as well as valiantly taking the zero-pointer head-on when you saw someone in trouble, 74 rescue points. Tashinori beams at the camera, smile wide and eyes flashing. This puts your score at a whopping 154. A new record for Yui High. A total of 36 points more than the last record holder. He pauses here, before jabbing a thumb to his own chest. Me? Izuku's chair tips over as he springs up, his hands flying to his hair. What? He half screeches, half squeaks, completely floored. Izuku hadn't meant to do that well in the entrance exam. He made sure he'd get in, obviously, but he wasn't trying to break any sort of record, let alone any of All Might's. Welcome, Midoriya Izuku, Tashinori says, voice softer this time. It pulls Izuku out of his frantic thoughts, his eyes sliding over to stare at his mentor, at his hero. To your hero academia. The screen goes black. Izuku stands there in the dark, clutching to the front of his t-shirt, his heart pounding. He's reeling, utterly floored. He can't believe that he somehow scored more than All Might than anyone else in Yui history. He glances around his childhood bedroom, thinks of the quirkless kid he used to be, thinks of where he started, how hard he has worked, all that he has done, all that he has failed to do. It's only when he tastes the salt of tears in the back of his throat that Izuku realizes that he's crying. He sinks down to the floor, curls one hand around his stomach, the other coming up to press against his quivering mouth. More than anything, Izuku wants to share this moment with Tashinori. He wants to run down to the beach where they spent so much time together, where Izuku's training began. He wants to go to Tashinori because he, out of everyone, would understand what something like this means to a quirkless boy. He wants to call All Might to tell him everything. He wants to tell him about the future and about One for All and all the other quirks that come with it. He wants to tell Tashinori what's ahead of them, about All for One's survival and his plans. He wants to tell him about the future and what they lost, and how Izuku plans to make it right. He doesn't want to be alone in this anymore. He wants someone to have his back. He wants someone to help him through. Izuku sits in the dark of his bedroom and cries. The night before his first day at Yui, Izuku hardly sleeps. He rolls from side to side, picking at his blankets, staring out the window, alternating between nervous excitement and cancerous dread. Yui is where he found his friends. Yui is what put a target on their backs. Yui is where Izuku began his journey as a hero. Yui is the place that failed to protect them. Yui is the beginning of it all, good and bad. Izuku gives up on sleep somewhere around 5 a.m. and hunkers down at his computer only to find himself watching a familiar video. Fear not, citizens, All Might calls. Izuku whispers the words under his breath, feeling that sticky anxiety in his chest start to lessen. Hope has arrived, because I am here. Izuku pauses the video on All Might's beaming smile, and only then does he realize that he's smiling back. Izuku clenches his fists, One for All a pulsating thing in his veins. He swears he can feel the past holders pressing in around him, lending Izuku their combined strength. Izuku takes a breath and stands up. His mom is waiting for him when Izuku leaves his room, buzzing about the kitchen, spices and ingredients floating around her as she frantically cooks breakfast. It takes her a moment to notice Izuku, standing there watching her. But when she does, she freezes, the items in the air tumbling to the counter and ground. Izuku jolts, glancing to the broken egg on the floor and back up to his mom. "Mama," he asks hesitantly. His mom blinks back to herself, her hands bunching up her apron. "Sorry, sweetie," she murmurs. "You just look so grown up," she says, voice watery. Oh, Izuku sags with the realization, because he had forgotten again that while this might be his first day of high school, it is still his mom's first time sending him off. Izuku takes a step forward, carefully walking around the broken egg in the middle of the kitchen floor, before he pulls his mom in for a hug. He's grown in the past year, and it shows in the way his mom's head rests on his shoulder, the way he can see over her head. Though Izuku is nowhere near what he used to be. "I'm not that grown up," he assures her with a soft smile she can't see, sharing in a joke that only he can understand. His mom gives a sniffling sort of laugh before pulling away, smiling wetly at Izuku. She gently tugs on his jacket, straightening it and trying to smooth out persistent wrinkles. She sighs, looking directly at Izuku. "I'm really proud of you, Izuku," she says, and Izuku feels something warm and aching bloom in his chest. "Thanks, Mom," he says, the last of his jitters petering out in the face of his mom's beaming smile. Izuku arrives at Yui early enough that the school is still empty and quiet. He drifts through the halls, lets his feet take him where he needs to be, even as Izuku's mind floats somewhere between past and present. He remembers vividly running down these very same halls, blood matting his hair to his head and dripping between his fingers. He can almost taste the smoke in the air, feel the way his heart had pounded so hard he could feel the pulse of it under his tongue. He remembers the screech of the Nomu, the click of their claws as they raced, four-legged and carnivorous, along the floors and walls and ceiling. Eyes gleaming in the dark, teeth shimmering in the light of stars and flames. Izuku remembers, vividly, what it is like to be hunted down in these very same halls. White smeared over in red splatters and black scorch marks. The screams of students and civilians echoing and blood-curdling, until there were no screams at all. Izuku's breath hitches, catching painfully in his chest. He stops in the middle of the hallway, shoes squeaking against the freshly polished floor. His fingers feel numb, his limbs bloated with unreleased energy. His heart is pounding in his ears, so loud it almost drowns out the sound of his own labored breathing. Izuku spins on his heel and ducks into the nearest bathroom, trying to blink shadowed figures out of the corners of his eyes. He stumbles over to the sink, clutching to the ceramic hard enough that it cracks underneath his fingertips. Izuku forces himself to let go, to breathe, to get it together. He lets out a gust of air as he glances up at himself in the mirror. He hardly recognizes the person staring back at him. Wild green hair sticking up at unruly angles, unscarred pale face, baby fat still lining his two young cheeks, freckles splashed along the bridge of his nose and below his sleep-deprived eyes. Izuku hasn't been this person, this child, in years. He feels so distant from the person he used to be, someone who still believed that heroes were infallible, unstoppable, invincible. Someone who saw the best in people and the world, who thought everyone deserved a second chance. A boy who truly believed he could make a difference, that he could save people. Izuku blinks at his past self in the mirror and wishes he could find that same resolve, that same determination, that same sense of hope he'd felt before. All those thoughts seem so out of his reach now. Izuku shakes his head to himself and leans down to splash some cold water onto his face, trying to scrub the past 5 years from his skin, and when that doesn't work, scrubbing away any sign of his breakdown instead. Izuku makes his way to 1A without any further interruptions, sliding into the classroom and shutting the door behind him. Even with his delay in the bathroom, Izuku is still the first to have arrived, which might be for the best, seeing as he isn't taking his first day back in Yui as well as he should be. It's hard to remember that he is a seasoned pro while standing here, amongst 20 desks in a familiar classroom. Izuku feels caught somewhere in the middle. He doesn't feel 15, not really, but he doesn't feel 19 either. It's hard not to feel like a kid while wearing this uniform. But it's hard not to feel like a soldier while inside these walls. Izuku runs his hands over a row of desks as he makes his way to his seat, taking off his backpack and lowering himself to his own desk in a dazed sort of stupor. It's hitting him harder than he thought it would, being back here. He needs to pull himself together before any of his classmates show up, or God forbid, Aizawa-sensei. It's not long after Izuku has sat down that the door slides open and Momo walks in. She pauses when she catches sight of Izuku, feet stuttering. "Oh," she says, clearly having thought she'd be the first to arrive. They are both absurdly early after all. She catches herself, smoothing out her surprised expression and walking up to Izuku, hand extended. "Hello," she greets. "I'm Yaoyorozu Momo. I must apologize. I hadn't expected any of my classmates to have arrived so early." Izuku gives Momo's hand a quick squeeze, forcing himself not to linger. He smiles at her, and it feels real on his face. "No need to apologize," he tells her. "I would not have expected anyone else either. But I wanted to get here early. First day nerves, you know." Momo gives a tentative smile, one of her closed-mouthed and genuine ones. She nods, giving the room a quick glance. "It is a bit intimidating, isn't it?" Izuku looks at Momo, the way she's clutching her books to her chest, back stiff and armored straight, uniform freshly ironed and perfect in every way. Everything about her put together and composed. Looking at her, Izuku only sees a scared and overwhelmed kid. "Terrifying is the word I'd use," he says, and Momo's head whips around to gape at him. Izuku gives her a soft smile, one that he used to use when he was pulling civilians and children out of harm's way. "We made it. We're finally here. In the Yui Hero course. And it's..." Izuku takes a moment, looks around at the rows of desks and the lockers lining the wall. "And it's amazing and incredible, but it's also terrifying." He glances back up to see Momo staring straight at him. Her fingers have gone slack around her textbooks, some of the tension in her shoulders having lessened. She gives a small nod before she mumbles, "Yes, that is exactly it." A moment of silence stretches between them, and then Momo is clearing her throat, saying, "And, you are?" Izuku blinks in bewildered surprise before it hits him. Because of course Momo would need a proper introduction, because while Izuku knows her, knows her fears and insecurities and even some of her secrets. This version of Momo does not remember him, doesn't know him. Feeling stupid, Izuku gives a slight bow of his head. "Oh yes, my name's Midoriya Izuku. It's very nice to meet you, Yaoyorozu-san." It's going to be so odd having to reintroduce himself to his classmates again, to have to start from square one, to have to earn their trust and slowly become their friend again. But as Momo goes to sit down and Denki and Fumikage filter into the class, Izuku thinks to himself how lucky he truly is to get to re-meet his friends again. No one else will get to experience such a gift, to have the same friendships in 2 different lifetimes. It's about 10 minutes until the start of class, and Izuku is doing his best not to outright stare at any of his former and current classmates. It's hard not to when he has waited so long to see them again. It's so odd seeing them all like this, young and carefree, excited for their first day at UE. So unaware of the burdens they'll later hold, of all the pain and suffering that waits for them. Izuku shakes his head at himself, gritting his teeth. No, he won't let it happen again. He'll protect them, so his classmates can keep what's left of their childhoods and grow into adulthood, into the heroes they were always destined to be. Izuku is so preoccupied with his thoughts that he doesn't notice Kyoka approaching him until she's already standing right at his desk. Izuku jolts in surprise, giving her a practiced smile. Good morning," he says, feeling a bit caught off guard. Out of all of his friends, Izuku wouldn't have thought Kyoka would be the one to approach him like this. Her expression is pinched and slightly awkward as she replies, "Good morning. I think you're in my seat." Izuku pauses, taking stock for a moment. He's definitely in his seat, chair 12, in front of Shoto and behind Jizo. But when Izuku glances up, he finds Mizo in front of him, large and hard even at this age. A glance behind him shows Hanta, and a quick scan of the rest of the classroom only solidifies Izuku's raising anxiety. There is a mixture of Class A and Class B students around him. He hadn't noticed before, trying to keep his head down so he wouldn't openly stare at his lost friends. But now that he has finally looked up, he finds himself choking on air. Izuku's eyes skip around, searching for his classmates. And some are correct, like Momo, Kyoka, and Koji. But others are wrong. Mina, Hanta, and Ijiro are not supposed to be in Class 1A. Oh God, oh no. Izuku stands up abruptly, feeling a little winded at the realization. It's a small detail in the grand scheme of things, but it isn't one that Izuku had anticipated, and it leaves him feeling dizzy. He always assumed that Aizawa-sensei and Kan-sensei had a say in who would be in each of their classes, or at least that Nizu arranged the classes himself. But he supposes their assigned classrooms must have been randomly given, because as Izuku glances around, somewhat panicked, he finds that half the faces are wrong and others are missing. Oh God, what if him getting so many points in the practical exam somehow screwed up their chances and some of his classmates didn't make it into the hero course at all? But no, even if these aren't all his same classmates from 1A, they do all seem to be the same hero students from Izuku's timeline. He recognizes everyone. Even if the 2 classes got shuffled up, Izuku still knows these people. He still trusts them, even if he never got the chance to know Hagakure or Ojiro all that well in the previous timeline. Even if he only met Aoyama and Suda in passing or in battle, he still knows them. It will be all right. Oh God, please let Ochako be in his class. Are you okay? Kyoka asks, face twisted in concern, and Izuku suddenly realizes that he's standing in the middle of the classroom, scanning his classmates with unconcealed panic. Kyoka can probably hear Izuku's breath rattling out of his lungs. Why yes, he says too loud. Izuku tries to will himself to calm down. Yes, I'm fine. I'm sorry about taking your seat. That was my assigned place in my old class. I guess I just sat there out of habit. Kyoka nods as she slides into the seat Izuku had just been occupying. Izuku is quick to pull his backpack and notebook out of her way. It's fine, she says with a shrug. She slips off her messenger bag, hooking it on the seat behind her. I'm Jiro, by the way. Izuku distractedly starts pulling out his class schedule from his bag, frantically looking for his new seat assignment. Izuku, he replies, and then realizes they are not on a first-name basis. Midoriya Izuku. He corrects himself. He's going to need to stop referring to his friends by their given names, even in his head, or else Izuku is eventually going to slip up, and he can't think of a good excuse for accidentally calling someone by their given name when he's only known them for a day. Got your seat number? She asks Izuku after a moment, watching as Izuku fumbles with his papers, scanning them quickly. Yeah, he says, nodding his head toward the front. I'm 18 this time around. This time around? Kyoka, Jiro asks, raising an eyebrow. Izuku waves off the question, heads for his new seat, tries not to let his hands shake too much as he settles his papers back down. Nice to meet you, Jiro-san, he says, sorry for the seat theft. Nah, you're cool, Midoriya, Deku. Izuku spins around to find a very irate Bakugo Katsuki heading straight for him. Oh, wow. Looks like Kakin is in his class this time around. Izuku is somehow both wary and relieved to find this out. Even if half of his classmates are in Class 1B, at least this time, he'll have Kakin by his side straight from the start. Though, Kakin does not look happy to see Izuku, which Izuku isn't all that surprised about, seeing as he's been avoiding the other boy since they both got their acceptance letters into UE 3 weeks ago. Izuku even skipped out on the meeting with the principal at Aldera. He really didn't want to be there when the news about Izuku getting first place was given to Kakin. He was mad enough the first time around, when Izuku had just barely scraped by. Izuku didn't want to imagine how Kakin must have reacted when he found out that Izuku placed higher than him. You shitty nerd. Kakin slams Izuku into the wall behind him. Not hard enough to hurt, but certainly hard enough to let Izuku know not to try anything. You think you could avoid me forever? That I wouldn't find out? Izuku grabs onto Kakin's wrist, the one tangled in Izuku's blazer. He holds on, not trying to pry Kakin off, but not letting him press Izuku against the wall any harder. I didn't need to avoid you forever, Izuku starts, drawing out the word, pretending this isn't the most grounded he's felt all morning. Just until we were both on UE grounds. What's that supposed to mean? Kakin sneers, pressing up against Izuku, using his superior height to bear down on him. Well, joke's on him, because Izuku knows that he ends up taller than Kakin. Izuku whispers the next part, so only Kakin will hear well, and Kyoka and Mizo he supposes, but there's no helping that. Yui takes acts of bullying and quirk discrimination very seriously. They're training the next generation of heroes, after all. They can't be lenient with such things. So the only time I have to worry about you now, Kakin, is when we're off of school grounds or in hero training. Which I insist you give your all in. Izuku leans up, smiles, challenging. Because I'm going to do my best to become the hero I know I can be. Izuku pushes Kakin off of himself, slides away from the wall, and slips past the other boy. You did it, Katsuki. We did it, Izuku tells him. We're here. We're finally at UE, the school where true heroes are made. Now, are you going to keep trying to pin me down under your shoe, or are you going to do your best to catch up to me? Kakin's eyes are blazing. He bares his teeth at Izuku, sparks popping in his enclosed fists. Why would someone like me need to catch up to a Deku like you? I left you in the dust back when we were just kids. Izuku raises an eyebrow, unperturbed. Did you? He hums under his breath, turning away from his childhood friend. I wouldn't be so sure, Kakin. I might just surprise you. At that moment, danger sense jolts through Izuku's skull, the sound of tiny explosions popping as Kakin lunges for the back of Izuku's head with a shout of rage. But Izuku twists around and captures Kakin's hand in his own before he can light Izuku's hair on fire, the two of them coming to an abrupt standstill in the middle of the classroom. They stare at each other for a long, tense moment, red eyes blazing, green eyes anticipating. What is going on here? A very familiar voice demands from the doorway. Izuku drops Kakin's hand and takes a step back, watching as Kakin does the same, still seething. Izuku turns away from him and stares right at his old teacher. Something in his chest clamps down and twists hard enough to leave Izuku breathless. It's such a hard, visceral feeling that for a moment, Izuku wonders if Kyoka can somehow hear it. Apologies, sir, Izuku says, standing up straighter under Aizawa's unimpressed gaze. Just a bit of a misunderstanding. Aizawa-sensei's eyes track from Izuku over to Kakin, slow and calculating. Izuku can see the exact moment that Aizawa-sensei decides that he's too tired to deal with him right now. "Don't make a habit of having misunderstandings in my classroom," he says, glaring at the two of them. "I don't tolerate melodrama, and I definitely don't tolerate quirk usage outside of training." The last part is aimed at Kaken, who scoffs under his breath. Aizawa-sensei pauses, scanning over the rest of the class. "Hello, I'm Aizawa Shota." He introduces himself as he walks into the room. He doesn't have his sleeping bag this time around. Izuku wonders if he left it behind when he heard Kaken and Izuku arguing. "I will be your homeroom teacher this year." He stops in front of them all, and Izuku gets such a sweeping sense of déjà vu that he wavers on his feet. "All right, put these on and meet me outside," Aizawa-sensei says, pulling a set of gym clothes seemingly out of nowhere. "It's time we get started." He turns, heads for the door. "Welcome to Yui's hero course." And with that, he's gone, and Izuku has to hide his wavering smile behind the palm of his hand as his classmates break out into confused and excited whispers. Izuku goes and grabs his gym uniform, feeling floaty and a little bit like he's running headlong into a battle. "Here we go again," he murmurs to himself. And so, for the second time, Izuku's high school career begins. Izuku is the first one to change and get out of the locker rooms. The rest of the boys have been chatting amicably and introducing themselves to one another, taking their time and putting their gym uniforms on. Izuku knows he should have taken a moment to reintroduce himself to his classmates. But while Izuku knows that there is no need to rush, the habit of being quick is too ingrained for him to ignore. Aizawa-sensei is, of course, already out on the field. Izuku shares a brief nod with his teacher and then pulls his gaze away. It seems like that's what Izuku has been putting all of his energy into this morning. He hadn't realized how hard this would be, to be amongst his old classmates, to stare them in the eye and pretend he doesn't know their names, to stand next to them, seeing them so animated and alive and happy, and to ignore the memories of dust and cinders, of blood and screaming. Save them. Save them. He has to save them. Izuku takes in a breath large enough to fill up his whole entire chest, and lets his eyes wander toward the beaming blue sky. The sunspots obscuring his vision are nearly enough to burn away the ash floating at the corners of Izuku's eyes. Save them. Save them. Save them. It takes him a moment to feel the eyes on him. But then Izuku is looking back down toward Aizawa, who has his tired gaze locked on Izuku, seeming curious. Izuku bites back a smirk. He always knew that Aizawa-sensei would be one of the biggest players on the board. That Izuku would have to watch out for him from the start. Aizawa-sensei is incredibly observant and calculatingly smart. But it will take more than some probing looks and some cursory poking around for Aizawa to find what he's looking for. "Sorry, Aizawa-sensei," Izuku mentally apologizes to the man. "But I've already accounted for you." "It's you," a voice from behind him startles Izuku. But then he's twisting around and seeing a very welcome face. "Ochako," he calls, beaming, and then immediately winces at his mistake. He pushes forward, hoping Ochako won't notice his slip. "How's your leg?" he asks. Ochako lifts up her right leg, twisting it back and forth in the air, as if to prove that it is no longer broken. "Recovery girl fixed it," she says, smiling. At Izuku, "Thanks again for saving me. I'm not sure what would have happened if you weren't there." Izuku's chest feels warm. He tries to make sure none of the lovesick nostalgia shows on his face. "You don't have to thank me," he says, and the words come out maybe a tad too soft. Ochako steps up next to Izuku, knocking her shoulder into his. "I was hoping we'd be classmates," she says, glancing out at the track and field. "It's always nice to have a familiar face nearby." Izuku blinks at her, suddenly feeling choked. He forces his eyes away to stop scanning her, looking for the differences, looking for the similarities. "Yeah," he says, swallowing hard. "Yeah, it is." Once everyone has arrived, and Aizawa-sensei has explained that they are doing a quirk assessment test, he suddenly addresses Izuku. "Midoriya," he says, "you are the current record holder for most points earned in the entrance exam." At that, Izuku's classmates break out into murmurs around him, and Kaken growls lowly under his breath. Aizawa ignores them all, tired eyes still locked on Izuku. What was your furthest softball throw in junior high? Izuku tries to think back to years and years ago when he was young and quirkless and untrained. Somewhere around 45 meters, he hedges, guessing more than anything. Right? Aizawa-sensei nods, gesturing to the circle behind him. Now try it with your quirk. Anything goes as long as you stay in the circle. Izuku breaks away from his classmates, taking the ball from Aizawa's hand. He'd forgotten about this part. The first time around, Aizawa-sensei hadn't even finished his sentence before Minoma Nito had stepped up, grabbing the ball and launching it with the fire he had copied from Shoto's right side. That had not gone over particularly well. Izuku shakes his head to himself, knocking those thoughts out of his head. He needs to stay focused on the here and now, make sure he stays grounded in the moment. It's too easy to get lost in his head or his memories. Are you going to throw the ball, or are you going to stand there all day? Izuku inclines his head toward his teacher, taking a breath as he lets Black Whip curl around the softball, energy tingling up his arms and around his waist. Izuku closes his eyes for a moment, thinks about how this went the first time around, when he had so much power and no control over it, when he was terrified and sure he was going to be expelled, when he was a kid in a quirkless body, suddenly bestowed with a quirk more powerful than he could ever imagine, when he was new and floundering and had no idea who or what he was, when he hadn't known what all of it meant for him, for the world. Izuku's eyes snap open, and then he pulls Black Whip back and flings it forward, a burst of one for all lacing through him and coursing into the tendrils. There isn't a gust of wind or a boom of sound like there might have been if Izuku used his strength. But the energy still tingles in the air, making Izuku's hair stand up and his skin buzz. He watches the ball soar through the sky until he can't see it any longer, and then Izuku turns back toward his classmates. They're all staring at him in awe and bewilderment, eyes wide and grinning. Ochako smiles beamingly when she catches Izuku's eye, giving him a big thumbs up that immediately makes Izuku's eyes sting. A low pang of danger sense alerts Izuku to Kaken's glower aimed on him. Kaken takes a step forward, glaring daggers at Izuku. But Izuku just stares back, shakes his head once, and then inclines his head toward Aizawa-sensei. Don't Izuku tries to impart with just his eyes. He walks out of the circle, letting small tendrils of Black Whip trail behind him as a warning that he hopes Kaken heeds for once in his life. And as Izuku steps back in a line with his classmates, it seems that Kaken's common sense wins out over his stubborn rage this time. Izuku watches Kaken from the corner of his eye, and when Kaken finally settles down, Izuku does too. Aizawa-sensei hasn't missed the interaction. His eyes are calculating and dark, but thankfully he moves on from it without comment. You all need to know what you're truly capable of, Aizawa-sensei says, holding up his phone for them all to read. 1013. 7. You can't possibly become a pro hero without knowing the full capacity of your own quirk. Today is the starting line, where we'll see what you can really do. The rest of the class perks up, talking about how fun using their quirks will be. Izuku winces as he hears Hanta and Mina excitedly talking. And though Aizawa's threat of expulsion is harsh for a class of first years on their first day of school, Izuku gets it. He understands it in a way he wishes he never could. The reason that Aizawa-sensei was so HRD on them even from the start. Because this hero work, this life, it may look glamorous and exciting, but to be a true hero, to be someone who saves people, who puts their life on the line for others, it's harsh and real and terrifying and appealing. It will change who you are and how you view the world. It will take all the things you thought you knew about yourself and how society works, and it will upend it all. It will leave you questioning everything, questioning yourself. Being a hero isn't a game. It isn't all flashing lights and adoring fans. It's bleeding out in the rain. It's holding on to hope because it's all you have left. It's trying to save everyone but yourself. It's dying over and over again, even though you are somehow, always, the only one left who's still breathing. So Izuku understands why Aizawa taught them the way he did, and he is more grateful for it than he can express. Because if it weren't for Aizawa-sensei's teachings, Izuku doesn't think he'd be here today. No, he knows he wouldn't be here today. And that means something. The world is full of unfairness, Aizawa-sensei tells them, and Izuku didn't understand the full extent of what he meant before. But he does now. It's a hero's job to try to combat that unfairness. If you want to be a pro, you're going to have to push yourself to the brink. For the next 3 years, Yui will throw one terrible hardship after another at you. So go beyond plus ultra style. Show me it's no mistake that you are here. So, when Aizawa-sensei catches Izuku's eye, while his classmates panic around him, Izuku stares right back, fire in his veins and determination in his heart. Izuku holds Aizawa's gaze and nods. Black Whip isn't as versatile as One for All, but Izuku has always been creative, and he knows how to use it. He has years of training and experience that the rest of his class doesn't have, and it shows in all his scores in comparison to his classmates. Part of Izuku feels like he's cheating, that maybe he should hold himself back or not give these tests his all. But that feels more dishonest somehow. For Izuku to not give his best, while his classmates are giving their all in these tests. So Izuku, in a huge contrast to the first timeline, ends up in first place instead of last. Last goes to one Mineta Minoru, who stares up at the scoreboard with tears in his eyes and a twisted expression on his face. You can't do this, he turns to Aizawa, and Izuku cringes. Well, if Aizawa-sensei was going to be lenient with Mineta the same way he had been with Izuku the first go-around, he sure isn't now. You can't kick me out. Mineta yells, tears and snot running down his face as he stares up at Aizawa-sensei. This isn't fair. The world isn't fair, Izuku thinks to himself, and it's better to learn that lesson right here, rather than out there, where those very same lessons are taught in blood. Heroes have to be willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of innocence, to be brave in the face of death, to protect others above all else. Izuku never got to know Mineta very well in the previous timeline, since the other boy had been in 1B and Izuku in 1A. But he remembers the last time anyone had seen him, crying much like this, screaming and frantically trying to stop the Nomu with his quirk. He had panicked, and panicked people make mistakes. But Mineta's mistake had cost people their lives. Izuku glances over to Hagakure and Ojiro, thinking of the Yui raids, when they had been pinned back and trapped, and Mineta had sold them out so he could escape. He remembers hearing about it after, when it was too late to do anything but mourn. Izuku watches as Aizawa-sensei dismisses Mineta, and he can't find it in himself to feel anything but relieved. Some people don't seem to understand that in order to be a good hero, first you need to be a good person. After class, once they have all changed and everyone has picked up their syllabus, Izuku finds the courage to approach Tenya. You did well today in the Quirk Assessment. Izuku follows Tenya out of the classroom and into the hall. Tenya gives him a surprised but pleased look. I could say the same to you, he says, turning to Izuku. Ida Tenya, he introduces himself, extending his hand to Izuku. From Semi-Private Academy, it's a pleasure to meet you. Izuku takes Tenya's hand, smiling up at him. Midoriya Izuku, he says. Good to meet you, Ida-san. They walk for a moment in companionable silence, headed toward the stairs. Izuku grips the straps of his backpack tightly, taking in slow, careful breaths. He needs to play this right, gain his friends back naturally. It won't be hard to earn Tenya and Ochako's friendship. Izuku did it once, he can do it again. It's Shoto and Hitoshi that are going to take more time and planning. Izuku just needs to be patient, he reminds himself. He's been patient for a year now. He can handle a few more days. He'd been going to Aldera every day and pretending to still be quirkless, forcing himself to ignore the angry sneers and mocking jeers of his classmates, putting on a smile for his mom at home like nothing is wrong, focusing all of his energy into training and planning, so he could ignore the fact that his friends were out there somewhere and Izuku had to wait to meet them. Wait, plan, focus, be better, think faster, work harder, save them, save them, save them. Izuku clears his throat, walking faster to match his pace with Tenya's. What do you think of Yui so far, Ida-kun? Tenya immediately begins ranting about how prestigious Yui is, how honored he is to be at the #1 hero school. But then he pauses, fingers holding his chin in thought. But I can't say I agree with Aizawa-sensei's choice to expel a student on the very first day of school. It is quite an abnormal approach to teaching, but I suppose he must know what he's doing. Shaping the hearts and minds of the next generation of heroes must be demanding work. Izuku can't help but smile up at Tenya. He has some of the hardest beliefs and morals that Izuku knows. Tenya's always been a pillar for Izuku in that regard, especially when Izuku has needed support the most. Hey, wait up, you guys. A voice calls out behind them, and Izuku already knows it's Ochako, even before he sees her coming. Are you two going to the station? Infinity Girl, Tenya says under his breath, and then extends his hand to Ochako. Ida Tenya from Semi-Private Academy. And to answer your question, yes, we are headed to the train station. You may join us if you'd like. Ochako looks pleased as she carefully shakes Tenya's hand, her pinky held up in order to not send Tenya floating. Thanks, she says. I'm Uraraka Ochako, by the way. It is a pleasure to officially meet you, Tenya says, because at this age, he shows his awkwardness by being as polite as humanly possible. Hello, Uraraka-chan, Izuku greets, remembering not to use her given name this time. Hi, Izuku-kun, she says back, forgoing his surname entirely. Good job in the assessment test today. You have really good control of your quirk. Thanks, Izuku says as the three of them begin walking together. It took a lot of practice to control properly. Well, then your tenacity has paid off, Tenya says, gesturing sharply. I was impressed with how versatile your quirk truly is. Izuku shrugs, looking down at his shoes. Every quirk is versatile. You just have to figure out how to use it to the best of your abilities. Sometimes it isn't even about the quirk, but about thinking creatively. When he looks back up, Ochako and Tenya are sharing a long look. And then Ochako pumps her fist in the air, declaring, You're really cool, Izuku. Tenya hums. I'd have to agree. You are clearly leaps and bounds ahead of me as a hero student. I must strive to catch up with you. Izuku laughs. He's not even sure why. Maybe it's just the absurdity of it all. Maybe it's the sudden onslaught of compliments. Maybe it's the mere proximity to his friends. God, Izuku has missed them so much. With your quirk, Izuku starts, giving Tenya a sly smile. You'll be surpassing me in no time. Tenya splutters, and Ochako joins in when Izuku bursts into delighted laughter. It's when Izuku is walking home from the train station, only a couple blocks away from the apartment, that his phone rings. There aren't many people it could be. He hasn't had the chance to trade numbers with any of his current classmates. And Izuku, as the resident quirkless kid, has a whopping 3 cell numbers saved to his contacts. Hi, Mama, he says, pressing the phone to his ear. Are you all right? I thought your shift didn't end until 4 o'clock. Hello, sweetheart, his mom says back, voice hushed and hesitant over the receiver. I took off a little early. I'm on the train now. Izuku feels his brows scrunch in a confused sort of concern. Are you okay? He asks her, noting the worried pitch in her tone. He cuts through a back alley, headed back from where he'd just come, picking up the pace as he jogs toward the train station. Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine, his mom hurriedly replies, a little frantic. I was going to wait to talk to you until I got home, but I just couldn't wait. How was your first day of school, honey? Izuku pauses on the sidewalk. A car rushes past him, ruffling his hair and making his blazer ripple to the side. Some children let out shrieking peals of laughter from down the street. Izuku's grip on his phone relaxes slightly as he listens to the dull hum of the receiver and his mom's anxious breathing on the other side. Izuku takes in a stabling breath and reins himself in, pulling his scattered thoughts taut, trying to calm the restless feeling fluttering around in his chest. Izuku isn't sure there is a way to turn his fight or flight response off. It seems to be at a constant buzz at the back of his brain, sat dormant one moment, and then sent into a wild frenzy the next. He knows it's a byproduct of his past. Humans can't be hunted down and made to be prey without diverting back into base instincts. Treat someone like an animal for long enough, and that is exactly what they will become. Izuku just wishes he was a little more like a cunning wolf and a little less like a spooked rabbit. Izuku sucks in a big breath to recenter himself, pulling himself back to the conversation and his worried mother on the other end of the line. It was good, he tells her as he twists on his heel, headed for home. Her frazzled anxiousness makes sense now, Izuku realizes. She's probably been worried about him all day, wondering how he's been doing, if the other kids are picking on him, if the teachers are treating him fairly, if he's been deemed a person instead of an object, if he is yet again looked at as a disease meant to be eradicated. Izuku knows the everyday trauma of growing up quirkless is only rivaled by the constant fear of raising a quirkless child. A death sentence for one, a loss for the other. Yet, it was great, Izuku tells her, thinking of what she'd want to hear, of what would put her most at ease, of what he'd told her the first time around. Actually, it was amazing. Tell me about it, is her immediate reply. So Izuku does. He leaves certain things out, as he always does, like the fact that he scored the highest in the Quirk Assessment test, or that he's leaps and bounds ahead of his classmates. She doesn't know that he broke the UE record for most scored points in the entrance exam, and she hardly knows much about his newly discovered quirk at all. Izuku hates lying to his mom, but nowadays it seems like he's doing it near constantly. He doesn't outwardly lie, just leaves certain things out. Lies of omission gradually filling up the space in Izuku's lungs with all the words he cannot say. But sometimes secrets are gentler than truths. A blanket made up of warm lies and soft whispers, wrapped around a person to guard them from the harsh realities and cold realizations out in the real world. Izuku knows that a blanket is no substitute for a shield. Pretty lies and soothing words will hold up in a battle just as thin fabric would against a sword, leaving nothing but ripped tatters and torn pieces behind. But it is near impossible to rest with nothing but a hard, unyielding shield as your only source of warmth and comfort. Cold and sharp, a constant reminder of what battles lay ahead. Izuku will keep his mom wrapped up in that blanket for as long as he can, because he wants her happy and warm and safe. And when the moment comes that her blanket of lies is stripped away from her, well, then Izuku will gladly be her shield. But for now, because Izuku has missed the gentle piece of it, he joins his mother wrapped up in that blanket made for two. Sometimes it's nice to come out from the bitter cold and to let those warm lies wash over him. Even if he knows in the end he will have to drop that blanket and pick up his shield and wade back out into the storm. So Izuku tells his mom about his day, secrets lining up the walls of his chest, letting himself pretend for just a little while that he is nothing but a 15-year-old kid talking about his first day of high school. But even still, he can feel the cold pressing in. It's as Izuku is lying in bed, trying to shut off his brain enough to finally fall asleep, that it dawns on him. Izuku springs up, his mattress giving a shuddering squeak under him at the violent movement. He stares at the beaming face of All Might, hung up on the walls across from him. All Might, Izuku whispers to himself, the realization buzzing along his skin. I'm going to meet All Might today. Nervous excitement blooms in Izuku's chest and floods his limbs. That jittery, breathtaking feeling that lights you up from the inside out. That appealing, inescapable, terrifying feeling. Like the first time he'd ever used One for All, or when he'd finally unlocked Nana's power. That rush of excitement that can only come from doing something you never thought yourself capable of, or perhaps that you never dreamed would happen in the first place. Suddenly, Izuku can't sit still. He's up and out of bed, shucking off his pajamas and throwing on his joggers. He feels ecstatic and overflowing with energy. He knows that he won't be getting any sleep tonight. But that's fine. Izuku is used to going days without sleep, and he'll have the high of meeting Tashinori again to help push him through. I'm going to meet All Might today, Izuku whispers to himself again, lifting up his window and sneaking down the fire escape. I'm going to meet Tashinori. One for All lights up so brightly inside of him that it's like Izuku's body can't hold it inside any longer. Veins of red trail down his limbs as he lands. Green lightning crackling from his skin as Izuku makes his way toward the street. Purple mist trailing behind him as Izuku begins to run. Magenta sparks popping from his heels. Blue embers getting caught in his hair. Orange tendrils swaying from his fingertips. White static filling up his brain and leaking from his eyes, and encompassing it all, a glow of bright yellow. Izuku is washed in it, a kaleidoscope of colors and feelings pouring out of him as he sprints down the street. The vestige's powers pull together to make something appealing. A rainbow of color, so bright it paints the night around him and leaves Izuku blazing with it. We're here! We're here! We're here! Izuku knows that's what the past holders are telling him, even if he can't hear them anymore. He knows, even with their connection blocked, with their voices and advice and support locked away, Izuku knows. He knows that past users are with him, that he isn't ever truly alone. Even if he can't reach them, he knows they are watching. He knows, because though he may not be able to connect to them anymore, their light and power and quirks still light up his skin and fill his bones. We're here! We're here! We're here! Izuku closes his eyes as he runs, elated tears getting swept back by the wind. I know! I know! I know you are! He tries to convey, wondering if they can hear him any more than he can hear them. Izuku runs until his legs are quivering beneath him and his heart is hammering against his lungs. And then he collapses at the shoreline of Dagoba Beach, sand beneath his knees and waves rushing toward him. Izuku lets his head fall back and blinks up at the starlit sky. I know, he says, out of breath but still ecstatic. I know, he says again. You are all here, he whispers. And we're going to finally meet Tashinori today. Izuku sits on the beach and waits for the sun to rise. He somehow makes it to Yui on time. His hair is still wet from his rush shower, and his tie looks even worse this morning. But well, Izuku never learned how to properly tie it anyway. He's not as early as he'd been yesterday, but there's still some time before class. So Izuku decides to grab some breakfast before first PRD starts. He's munching on some rice, headed toward class, when he catches a glimpse of dual-toned hair out of the corner of his eye. Izuku can't help himself when he chases after it. Good morning, Izuku says, jogging up to catch Shoto. I saw you yesterday but didn't get a chance to say hi. Shoto doesn't say anything, but Izuku knows he's listening. Probably watching Izuku from the peripheral of his left eye. Izuku made sure not to walk in his blind spot on purpose. He knows that makes Shoto nervous. My name's Midoriya Izuku, Izuku says, not deterred by Shoto's silence in the least. You're Todoroki Shoto, right? Shoto's shoulders go tense, his fingers wrapped tightly around the strap of his school bag. Yes, he answers lowly, not looking at Izuku. Before, Izuku had thought Shoto was someone like Kaken. Someone who thought himself so above his peers that he wouldn't even take the time to talk to them. But Izuku couldn't have been more wrong. Shoto isn't arrogant, he's reserved and withdrawn. As new to having kind classmates and learning how to have friends as Izuku had been. But where Izuku had stuttered and stumbled his way through the unknowns of friendship, Shoto had closed himself off and shied away from it. This time, though, Izuku knows a little more about how to make friends, and he knows a lot more about Todoroki Shoto. So he knows when not to push, even if he'd like to. Well, it's nice to meet you, Shoto-kun, Izuku says, letting himself lag back. I'll see you in class. Shoto seems caught off guard for a moment, his steps faltering before he continues on. Izuku thinks that's it. Until, yes, I'll see you in class, Midoriya-san. Izuku beams at the other boys retreating back, counting the interaction as a win. Izuku doesn't think he would have survived the day if he didn't already have hours and days and weeks of stakeouts and strategizing and biding his time under his belt. But as it stands, he's still practically vibrating in his seat when hero training begins that afternoon. Except, instead of All Might bursting in through the door, Aizawa-sensei calmly strides in, looking haggard and exhausted and entirely done with this school year already, even though it is only the second day. Today is your first official day of Heroics Basics 101. He begins from his place at the podium. He pulls out a remote and clicks, the 20 lockers to the left opening up automatically. These are the costume support designed with your quirks and requests in mind. Put them on and meet me at the bus depot. You have 10 minutes. If you're late, we're leaving without you. With that, Aizawa-sensei begins for the door, and the rest of the class scatters immediately, grabbing for their briefcases and excitedly talking over one another. Izuku snags his briefcase with a quick tendril of Black Whip and jogs after his teacher, his heart hammering in his chest. Aizawa-sensei, he calls, catching his attention as Izuku falls in a step with Aizawa's long strides. While all might be joining us today, he can't help but ask, trying to smother any hint of desperation from his tone. He shouldn't be approaching Aizawa-sensei in the first place, shouldn't be asking needless questions, shouldn't be drawing any unwanted attention to himself. This is a stupid, reckless, impulsive decision. But Izuku can't help himself. Aizawa-sensei gives him a blank look over his shoulder, like Izuku has asked something extraordinarily ridiculous. He does that thing where he lets the silence draw out, letting you answer your own inane question. Izuku gives the man a sheepish smile, shrugging the uncomfortableness off his shoulders. I heard that he'd be helping to teach first-year heroics now that he's joined Yui, Izuku says, glancing down at his shoes, so he won't have to look Aizawa-sensei in the eye as he feeds him a half-truth. Don't believe everything you hear, Aizawa-sensei says. All Might has joined the faculty here at Yui, but he will primarily be teaching third years. Now, go change before you're late to class. Izuku knows a dismissal when he hears one. He bows his head. Hi. He acknowledges, and then he turns for the nearest bathroom. He doesn't have the time or the emotional stability to go join the rest of his classmates in the locker room right now. The disappointment in his gut mixes with the embarrassment already curdling there. He feels incredibly foolish for letting his own excitement mitigate his analytical thought. Of course, Tashinori's first priority would be Class 3A. That is where Mirio is, and Tashinori will be putting all of his time and energy into helping train his new successor. It's such an obvious conclusion. Izuku's an idiot for not seeing that. Izuku huffs at himself in irritation, shucking off his Yui uniform for his new hero costume. He's gone through plenty of varying designs over the years. Everything from the costume his mom first made him, to a state-of-the-art suit, to a collage of mismatched items pilfered from whatever he could get his hands on. His new costume, however, was made with a different fighting style in mind. Restricted down to one quirk, Izuku has had to vastly change the way he moves and fights. And with past injuries no longer inhibiting him, Izuku won't have to rely so heavily on shoot style. He's back to square one, for better or worse. For now, he has decided on an inverted design of his past costume, mainly black with hints of viridian green, made for stealth instead of something that will be distinguishable. For right now, he wants to be overlooked, not noticed. An underground hero instead of spotlight. Someone who works in the dark, going after the nastiest people imaginable. Someone who gets the job done and does so alone. His mask fully covers his face, with eye lenses that allow Izuku to see in the dark and will hopefully block out the glow of his eyes when he activates his quirk. He no longer requires braces for his arms, but he had them installed anyway. Better to get support now and not need it later. He decided to also include a short cloak, reminiscent of when he'd inherited Gran Torino's cape. He has steel-toed boots that cut off just below the knee and extra padding along the joints because Izuku knows the wear and tear of hero work. He gets all of his gear on in under 4 minutes, and it only takes him that long because Izuku is busy admiring his new equipment and checking the pouches of his utility belt for his requested supplies. He waits around in the bathroom for another minute or two, fiddling with his gloves and stretching out his joints, trying to waste enough time, so he won't be the first one changed and outside. Once is just a fluke, twice is a coincidence, but 3 is a pattern. And Izuku knows that Aizawa-sensei is a MSTR for spotting patterns and solving puzzles. No need to give him anything more than what Izuku has already let slip. When he thinks he's wasted enough time, Izuku stuffs his briefcase with his clothes into the overhead vent and makes his way outside to the bus station. When he gets there, Shoto, Ojiro, Fumikage, and Kakin are already lined up at the bus. A few others also making their way over. Izuku can't help but give his classmates a cursory sweep. He sees all the flaws and weaknesses in their costume designs, as well as the hints and makings of their future hero uniforms. He has to bite his tongue as he accounts for all the impractical details, has to remind himself that these are just prototypes for later designs. It takes time and experience to really learn what is and isn't going to work for your quirk and fight style. And right now, Izuku's classmates have neither. Eventually, Shoto will no longer hide his fire side, and Ochako will learn that heeled boots are impractical. Hagakure will be informed of Yui's ability to make an outfit out of her DNA, and Momo will eventually design her own outfit instead of letting her family submit one for her. But for right now, Izuku pulls his hood over his head so he can hide his grimace behind the privacy of his mask. Once everyone has arrived, Aizawa-sensei shoos them onto the bus without any indication of where they are going. Without Tenya as their guiding class president, and Momo lacking her innate sense of confidence, the bus is utter chaos, but Izuku expected little else. It's hard not to be excited about their first day of hero training. Izuku follows Ochako onto the bus, sitting between her and Azui as the rest of the class scrambles for their seats. "I like your hero costume," Ochako tells him as the bus begins to move. "It's darker than what I expected from you, though." Izuku pulls up his mask, running a hand through his mustache hair. "Well, actually, I might end up having two costumes, I think," he tells her, twiddling his thumbs together as he shares his thought process. "When I was little, I wanted to be a spotlight hero, like All Might. Someone who saves everyone, who brings people hope. But well, underground heroics have their place for a reason. They're able to reach the people that spotlight heroes sometimes can't, the people who would otherwise be left behind." Izuku stares down at his hand in his lap. He feels that same old resolve setting into his bones as he clenches his hand into a fist. "I want to be a hero to all people. Day or night, publicly or anonymously, I don't care. As long as I save as many people as I can. As long as I'm able to take the hand of anyone who's reaching out for help." "Wow," Azui says from Izuku's other side, startling him out of his thoughts. "You've really put a lot of thought into this, Midori-kun." She bows her head slightly at him. "I'm Azui Tsuyu, by the way, but you can call me Tsu." Izuku nods back, forcing himself to meet her eye. He knows exactly who she is. She had been the first victim of the League of Villains. The first casualty of the war, the first person Izuku had ever watched die, the first person he failed to save. Azui Tsuyu. At first, before anyone knew who the League really was. Before they were anything but a nameless group of villains. Before the attack at the USJ was considered anything but a tragedy. Her name had circled around the nation. A young girl's life cut far too short. A daughter and sister who was mourned by her family. A child that Yui had failed to protect. But later, when the League had made a name for itself, when they began to attack cities and unleash their Nomu, when Shigaraki was a name whispered for fear of being heard, then Azui Tsuyu became the symbol for the rebellion. The first victim of the League. A young, innocent girl, killed for no reason at all. Evil for nothing but evil's sake. She represented the death and chaos and heartbreak that the League left in their wake. She represented all the victims of the war, all the people they had lost. She was the face that was plastered across buildings and painted along the streets. She was a sign of what they had lost and what they were fighting to protect. Izuku never got to know her before. She became a concept more than a person. The first of many. Another person that Izuku wasn't hard enough to save. But Izuku would like to get to know her now. "I'll save you. I'll save you. I'll save you. Nice to meet you, Tsu," he says, taking her hand and giving it a gentle squeeze in his own. He'll protect her, Izuku vows to himself. He'll protect all of them. He won't let it be like before. He won't let anything happen to them. He refuses to let any one of them become a symbol of loss instead of the heroes they strive to be. "I'll save them. I'll save them. I'll save them." The promise sits heavily inside of his chest. "Welcome to Ground Omega," Aizawa-sensei says once they've arrived and piled off the bus. He gives a vague gesture toward the vast amount of forest behind him. Today's exercise will be centered on evasion and defense. Quirks are permitted if used non-combatively. If you use your quirk on another student, that is an immediate disqualification. He pauses, waits until everyone nods or gives their assent. "Good." Aizawa-sensei takes a step to the side, showing an orange line painted across the grass. "Your starting point is here. Your goal is to either make it to the exit gate on the other side or last until time runs out. This is the designated area. Leaving it means you have forfeited. Are there any questions?" Tenya's hand immediately shoots up. Sensei, sir, will we just be racing against the clock? Or are there other factors to account for? This is where Aizawa-sensei gives one of his terrifying smiles, one that is half hidden in the folds of his capture weapon. You will have a 2-minute head start, and then I will enter the playing field. The class breaks out into disquieted murmurs, which just seems to make Aizawa-sensei smile all the wider. Your goal is simple, he cuts through the chatter. Avoid being caught. Whether that means running or hiding is entirely up to you. He angles himself to the side, sweeping his hand out toward the forest. Your 20 minutes begins now. Some of the class takes off the second the words leave Aizawa-sensei's mouth. Apparently, they've already learned that lesson from the entrance exam. But others, like Izuku, take a moment to assess the situation and think things through. The parameters of the exercise are somewhat vague. Aizawa-sensei didn't specify how far away the exit is, or whether or not he is allowed out of the assigned bounds. Details like that are crucial to know in order to make strategic decisions. Aizawa-sensei knows the playing board and holds far more pieces of the game than any of them combined. But Izuku also knows that out in the real world, best-laid plans scarcely hold up in battle. Having any sort of information beforehand is a luxury, not a guarantee. If you don't treat every mission as if you are headed in blind, then you risk becoming so focused on one thing that you completely overlook another. Go in knowing your plan will need to change, and you are more ready to adapt when unknowns fall on top of your head. Izuku turns to Aizawa-sensei, who has his eyes closed, looking halfway to falling asleep while standing up. It's just the two of them now, everyone else having darted off into the woods. Izuku has about 30 seconds before his teacher will begin his hunt. Are you planning to forfeit so quickly? Aizawa-sensei breaks the silence, not bothering to open his eyes. Izuku smirks even though Aizawa-sensei cannot see it, or perhaps because he can't. You said we can't use our quirks combatively. Does that mean if you capture us, we aren't allowed to fight back? This gets Aizawa's attention. His eyes squint open to stare at Izuku. You can surely try, he drawls. But I doubt it will be much help. And with that, Izuku's 30 seconds are up, and Aizawa-sensei's scarf is lashing out. Izuku springs away with a burst of adrenaline, flipping between the strands of Aizawa's capture weapon. It was foolish of you to waste so much time, Aizawa tells him, the two of them doing a bit of a dance as Aizawa-sensei erases Izuku's quirks and Izuku continues dodging. Was it? Izuku asks, a little out of breath now. His heart is pumping, and his muscles are singing. But for the first time in a long time, it's not from training himself into the ground or from running away from his past. Izuku didn't realize how much he missed sparring until this moment. Maybe I'm just helping my classmates get a head start, Izuku says, dropping to his hands so the strands of Aizawa-sensei's scarf launch over him. Cocky, Aizawa-sensei says, but it doesn't exactly sound chiding. I didn't take you for overconfident or stupid. Surely you realize you can't win against me one-on-one. Izuku smiles, flipping through the air and narrowly evading another swipe of the scarf. Sure, he agrees. But you are going to go all out on some first years on their second day of school. And I don't exactly plan on sticking around. Before Aizawa-sensei can reply, Izuku reaches into his utility belt and throws down a glass bottle. It shatters against the ground, releasing a plume of smoke and cutting Izuku off from Aizawa's sight. Izuku had filled up that bottle with some of his own smoke before this battle. He doesn't normally need to store smokescreen, but well, he'd thought ahead, and he knows how to counter Aizawa-sensei's quirk. With his own quirks returned, Izuku sends out 2 tendrils of black whip and hooks the ends around some neighboring trees. He pulls back, and then launches himself forward, slingshotting through the air and flying high above the tree line. Izuku knows when Aizawa-sensei has spotted him, because his quirk vanishes again. But it's already too late. Izuku has enough momentum to keep sailing forward, far out of Aizawa-sensei's reach. Izuku cackles as he crashes into the foliage of the trees, sprinting for all he's worth, just because he can. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku Went Back in Time. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Fernando de Leo for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on archiveofourown.org for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.